Okay, so if you've been in youth group lately, you know that we are taking classic literature and comparing and contrasting it to some of the stories in the Bible, and we're also wrapping up Acts. So depending on which week you're there and what we're doing, you may be caught up or you may be a little behind. I also am behind on making these videos, so I understand. However, some of the literature that I have been reading to you guys in class is not yet in the public domain. Therefore, YouTube will not be happy with me if I read it aloud to you on here. So I'm going to just very briefly go over some of the notes from Acts, and then I hope to see your beautiful faces in class so that you don't miss the wider discussion, okay? So Acts 12. This was from the 11th, so 3 weeks ago now. This is Herod Agrippa the first, which is the grandson of Herod the Great. Okay, so Agrippa became the first king of Judah AD 41 through 44. And he was actually the first king of Judah since his grandfather. So I thought that was interesting. There was an interim there where there wasn't a king of Judah. Verse 2 mentions decapitation. Decapitation was considered to be a merciful form of execution. The Sanhedrin, remember we've talked about this, they lacked the right to execute, right? They had to get Roman permission. Agrippa was a king appointed by Rome, and so he kind of had a workaround. He was able to execute at will, even though, yes, he was a Jewish person. Okay. And then verse 4, Roman military delegated special tasks to units of soldiers or squadrons. So different squads mentioned in verse 4 likely worked on different shifts, similar to if maybe your parents work shift work. It's kind of the same idea here. Verse 4, sometimes Agrippa would execute for entertainment purposes. I think that's all I'm going to say about that one. Verse 6, this being chained between two soldiers and then bound with two chains, it was like the impossible. It's like the Mission Impossible version of escaping. You can't escape. And that was what Peter was faced with here in the story, in this narrative, is that he was bound with two chains and he was bound in between two Roman soldiers. The fact that he escaped can only be attributed to God, right? Verse 12 about the house. So in the first 3 centuries AD, churches met in homes. This was cheaper for them if you think about not having to pay for renting a space, right? It's also safer because who's to distinguish between you meeting as Christians and you just having a party, right? A house large enough for people to gather and with an outer entrance and with a servant tells us that this family was wealthier than average, and probably it was located in the upper city part of Jerusalem. Verse 15, we have the common Greek motif of foolish slave girl. Unfortunately, that was kind of just like we had certain themes and kind of jokes that we hit a lot in our books, TV shows, music, popular culture. The foolish slave girl was a common motif of that time, right? So Luke brilliantly and subtly shows us that it's actually the people praying for Peter in this story that are foolish and not the slave girl. Rhoda did exactly what she needed to do. Maybe she should have invited Peter in. Okay, fine. But other than that, no notes. She told him Peter was there, and she was right. She actually had more faith than the ones praying for his release, right? Verse 17, this James mentioned off, this is a different one. I thought this was important. This is different from the one mentioned in verse 2. This is Jesus, his half-brother, and he was martyred approximately 30 years later. Okay, so that's one of the reasons we know it's a different one. Verse 19, Romans punished guards who let prisoners escape, and they would get whatever punishment those prisoners were going to get. So the fact that the guards were executed means that Agrippa had already decided to execute Peter. Like that's one of the reasons we know that this was it was going to be capital punishment. Okay, and so those are my notes for Acts chapter 12, and I hope to see you in class.